Richard quit his job right after Kyle was born. Pretending to be a travel writer, he never really worked, depended on my income, and lived a carefree life driving across the country. One night, Richard returned from a trip with a young woman holding a baby. "This is Cindy, my lover, and our child. I'm giving the son to you. We're getting divorced," he said, pushing the signed divorce papers at me, his breath heavy with anger. "Come back for it in a week. Make sure you've signed by then." A week later, Richard and Cindy reappeared, to which Kyle and I said, "You can't divorce Mom, you know? Because you still owe me $80,000 for the car." Richard's cheeks twitched. "And Dad, since you've been living off Mom's earnings, maybe you should wait to divorce until you can support yourself?" Cindy looked utterly confused. Richard stuttered his excuses. I couldn't help but smirk. "So, Richard, it's time to pay for all the freedom you've taken for granted. I am Maria, a 50-year-old housewife. I live with my same-aged husband, Richard, and our 8th-grade son, Kyle. I met Richard through a mutual acquaintance and we started dating. Always brimming with confidence and vitality, Richard was a great conversationalist and fun to be around. I thought life with him would be wonderful, so when he proposed at a chic restaurant, I was over the moon. But less than a year later, I began to regret my decision. We should have kids soon. Considering our age, yes. After that conversation, we were blessed with a honeymoon baby, which felt like a climb to heaven. Looking back, that time might have been the happiest. When morning sickness made me sick and I couldn't do household chores, Richard never blamed me but took care of me. "Maria, can you eat some chicken porridge? How about white fish? Fruits are good for you too." Richard, not a fan of cooking, bought ready-made porridge, soup, and fruits from the local supermarket and brought them to my bedside. He made sure I didn't feel sick by eating alone in the dining area and even did the dishes after. On weekends, he would do the laundry and cleaning. "Richard, I'm sorry for the trouble and thank you for everything." When I thanked him, Richard smiled and gently patted my head. Supporting each other is what marriage is about, right? Remember, it's not just your body here. Don't overdo it. Considerate and kind, and a full-time employee at a large corporation. I truly felt fortunate to be married to him. But the happiness ended abruptly. When labor started early in the morning, Richard took a day off to take me to the hospital and waited outside the delivery room for our baby's arrival. Soon, our baby was born safely. The midwife went to Richard with the baby wrapped in a blanket, smiling, "Congratulations. It's a healthy boy." At that moment, Richard's complexion changed. Not a girl? It's a boy." Richard's expression turned from one filled with anticipation to one of deep disappointment. After moving to the hospital room, Richard let out a deep sigh and grumbled in an annoyed voice. "Ah, a boy, huh?" At that time, not yet realizing the seriousness of the situation, I offered comfort to Richard with a bitter smile. "Richard, you wanted a girl, didn't you? You probably were told by the doctor that it's a boy. That's too bad. I've heard there are still families who wish for a male heir. However, neither my mother-in-law nor Richard seemed to be particularly eager for a boy. Although we found out the gender at Richard's request, I honestly didn't mind either way. I always dreamed of being a father to a daughter." Richard's eyes widened in frustration. "Boys are smelly and dirty, and not cute at all. Why didn't you give birth to a girl?" His harsh words made my blood boil. "How can you say that? It's not like we can choose. Even gender selection isn't 100% successful. It's our precious baby, shouldn't the gender be irrelevant? There's no way I can be okay with this. Ah, damn it. I seriously don't need a boy." With those words, Richard left the hospital room. From then on, he didn't visit the hospital again, nor did he contact me, leaving me to be discharged alone. Since my parents lived too far away to ask for help, I reluctantly called my mother-in-law to pick me up. Richard was really looking forward to the birth of a girl. I understand why he's upset. I explained the situation, but as expected, my mother-in-law took Richard's side. "You're not going back to your parents' house, right? I can come over and help." "Thank you. I'll contact you if I need anything." I politely refused with a forced smile. It's a 30-minute drive from my in-laws. Rather than relying on my mother-in-law, who never misses an opportunity to make a snide remark, it's much more comfortable to raise our child on our own, even if we are busy. Richard will probably get over his sulking soon and start to adore the baby. That's what I thought, but I was naive. A hellish solo parenting life began. Before giving birth, Richard and I would pick out baby furniture online and read articles and books about babies together, imagining our future life with joy. However, as soon as Richard learned it was a boy, he seemed to lose interest. After coming home from the hospital, he left everything from naming the baby to the nitty-gritty care all to me. "Richard, can you hold Kyle for a bit? He's been crying nonstop, so I can't even prepare meals or clean." Even when I pleaded with Richard upon his return home, he wouldn't even glance at Kyle, responding coldly. "You know I'm tired from work. Show some compassion, will you? Dinner isn't ready? Then I'll just eat out. Taking care of the baby is the mother's job. I'll overlook the mess in the house, just make sure to do the laundry. I'd be in trouble without clean clothes." Even as Kyle cried, Richard ignored him, busy with his cell phone. No matter how much I asked, he wouldn't change diapers, nor take care of the bath or feeding. Of course, dealing with night crying was out of the question. One evening, as Richard became irritated with Kyle's crying while watching TV. "Shut up! He's been crying nonstop. He seems sleepy, but he won't fall asleep even if I hold him and soothe him. Take him for a walk then, he'll stop crying. Go outside." I was astonished. It's February, and moreover, it's 8 p.m. "You want me to go for a walk? It's snowing outside, are you out of your mind?" When I confronted him, Richard curled his lips into a sneer. "Driving around would be a waste of gas. He'll stop crying soon enough if it's cold." I was filled with intense anger at these unfatherly words. Holding Kyle, I grabbed the car keys, slammed the living room door, and left the house. After securing Kyle in the child seat and driving around the neighborhood for a while, I was relieved to hear his breathing settle into sleep. Upon returning home, I ignored Richard, who was rolling with laughter watching TV, and laid Kyle down in his crib. As days went by, my distrust in Richard only grew. One day, Richard came home in the early afternoon. "Home early today, aren't you?" While feeding Kyle his baby food, I asked, and Richard, while taking off his jacket, casually said, "I quit the job." What? I was stunned. I've been thinking, I'm not cut out to be an employee. Starting a business or leveraging my talents as a freelancer, that's more my speed. From now on, I won't be tied down by a company, I'll live as I please. Richard spoke with confidence, leaving my mind completely blank. I timidly asked, "Do you have another job lined up? You know I love driving, right? Plus, back in 3rd grade, I won first place in an essay contest. I think I have a talent. So, I'm going to travel across the country and write travelogues." Richard's eyes sparkled, and I felt like I might faint. After 12 years in sales, he's switching to writing? Richard doesn't even blog, and the computer in his study is just for show. Typical whimsical Richard, probably inspired by some internet article. Don't look so worried. In 2 years, I'll be making over $100,000. Seems like anyone can do it, so with my overflowing talent, I'll definitely be in demand. I alternated my gaze between Kyle, who was grabbing his food with his hands, and Richard, who was engrossed in his self-talk. I had planned to return to work once Kyle turned 1, but I never imagined I'd be supporting an unemployed husband. That afternoon, I need to start by getting the right environment. Richard left for the electronics store in high spirits to buy the latest model computer. After putting Kyle to bed and washing the dishes, I received a call from my MIL. Reluctantly, I answered the phone. "Hello? What have you been telling him?" My MIL began by scolding me. I don't understand what you mean. He would have been set for life at that company, but now, from an $80,000 salary to suddenly jobless? Unbelievable. That was exactly my thought. You're always fussing over the baby, and Richard quit his job because he was stressed. It's a wife's job to take care of her husband, you failure. If you have complaints, please speak to him. I'm busy, so I'm going to hang up now. My MIL was still shouting, but I hung up the phone and ignored her calls and messages for a while. Although I was furious with selfish Richard, I resolved to work earnestly to support Kyle. I hoped that by seeing me work hard at home and with the baby, Richard would reflect a little, but it was in vain. Richard would lock himself in the study and mess with his computer, then suddenly announce he was going to the Northeast for a trip, leaving without contact, and return days later. I couldn't leave Kyle with him, so I used the childcare facility at work, which accepted sick children, and worked hard. At this point, I felt more like a single mom than solo parenting. Full-time work while raising a young child was tough, but I shared parenting woes with colleagues who also had young kids, and we supported each other. With my salary, I even paid for Richard's writing course, and after a few years, he was making $300 a month. Still, our household income was entirely from my earnings. Richard didn't contribute financially, he spent what he made on personal expenses, even giving him money for gas. Then one day, while he was in the Southwest, Richard came home in a bright red sports car. What's this car about? Fell in love at first sight and bought it. This beauty for $50,000 is a steal, right? I was almost knocked off my feet. Wah, $50,000. Yeah, got bored of the old car after 2 years. This one's my new partner. Writers need to ride in style, right? I asked, pressing my temples, trying to stay calm. Wait, just wait. How did you pay for this? You have zero savings, right? Don't worry, it's on an 84-unit loan. You can spare $600 a month, right? I'll be a hit soon, so just cover it until then. I was dumbstruck by shock, but gradually filled with rage. There's no way I can afford $600. We're already scraping by as it is. Who do you think is struggling with money here? Then Richard, contorting his face, retorted. Every time you open your mouth, it's money, money. How shallow. When did you become such a person? Support your husband's dreams more. You're too realistic, it's boring. Saying this, he unleashed his anger on me and locked himself in his room. Dad's back? Kyle, having just woken up from a nap, stretched and asked me. Yes. He seems busy with work and has gone to his room. Say welcome back when he comes down. Okay. Hey, Mom, how long do you think Dad will stay home? I'm not sure. I'll ask him later. My heart ached at Kyle's lonely smile. Richard had been cold and distant, even as Kyle started preschool, never attempting to bond. Richard would respond if Kyle spoke, but he never initiated conversation or made eye contact. Maybe it would be better to get a divorce if things continue this way. But what if Kyle is hurt by knowing he's the reason for his parents' divorce? The thought held me back. It's been 15 years since Richard suddenly quit his job. His monthly income is still just a few $100s. The reason for his stagnant salary is clear. Richard, having mastered the computer, discovered the joy of online gaming and put work second, dedicating his time to games instead. Whenever he does have a substantial income, it quickly goes to gaming, with the rest spent on clothes or nights out at clubs. On the rare occasion he brings home a souvenir, he boasts about it for days. Those cookies I brought back last time were delicious, right? It's because of my job that we can enjoy such good things. Be more grateful. The sports car I had been paying off was soon sold for a new model. Of course, I protested at first. Asking for household expenses, suggesting he spend more time at home as a father, advising moderation in his hobbies. But Richard, veins popping on his forehead, would explode in anger. You're mocking me for my low salary, aren't you? Laughing at me, looking down on me. That's not it. I just wish you'd act more like a father. Patiently I spoke, and Richard, still angry, snapped back. Next year, I'll definitely be making $100,000. Then we'll have more freedom, I can spend more time at home, and I'll contribute to the household. Stop nagging and wait until then. Over time, the back and forth became too tiresome, and lately, I've given up on discussions. Maybe Kyle sees his father as a cautionary tale. He's grown up to be such a good boy. He always looks out for me when I'm tired from work. He helps around the house and even covers me with a blanket if I fall asleep on the sofa. For birthdays and Mother's Day, he prepares homemade dinners and presents me with bouquets of flowers. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard the front door unlock. Thinking Kyle had returned from his tutoring session, I was surprised to hear Richard's voice. He seemed to be talking to someone. A guest, perhaps? Curious, I took off my apron and headed to the entrance, only to freeze. Richard was standing there, arm in arm with a young woman holding a baby. Welcome back. Her scanty outfit, bold makeup, undoubtedly one of the regulars from the clubs he frequents. But why bring her to our house? The woman, following Richard into our home, pinched her nose and marched into the kitchen, sneering at the pot. It smells like garlic. Richard, it's going to stick to my clothes. Sorry, Cindy. Come on, Maria. Do something about it. It's okay, I'll endure. Is dinner just this? Pretty lame side dish. Richard, the full Italian course was delicious. The woman boasted proudly, while Richard smirked. That place is really good. My wife here is just this plain, so lame food suits her. Richard, you're terrible. Their laughter grew, and so did my irritation. Thanks to his meager salary, I've been out of touch with anything Italian for 15 years. I bite back the words at the tip of my tongue and ask Richard. Excuse me, who are you? Then the woman, with a challenging gaze, says with a spirited voice. Nice to meet you, I'm Cindy. Richard's wife. Hey, it's too soon. Richard looks over at Cindy and the baby, a doting smile spreading across his face. This is Cindy, my mistress, and our child. She gave me a daughter, isn't she adorable? Her nose is just like yours, Richard. The baby, dressed in pink, cradled against Cindy's chest, gazes at me with round eyes. Oh, really? And what do you want? I ask coolly, to which Richard smirks. I'm giving you our son. We're getting a divorce. He places the divorce papers, filled with anger, on the table, declaring loudly. Come get them in a week. Make sure you've signed by then. Richard has had enough of you. I'll take your place. Despite being the mistress, Cindy's arrogance knows no bounds. Richard, where are you going? This is your home, isn't it? I don't want to be with you anymore. I'll come back after you and Kyle have left. I'm dumbstruck by his unreasonable statement. They leave with a burst of laughter, heading out the front door. The distinctive loud noise of a modified sports car fades into the distance. I sit in stunned silence for a moment, then come to my senses and look down at the divorce papers. Anger surges within me as I look at them. He's abandoning his role as a father just because the child was born a boy. He quit his job on a whim, didn't contribute his meager earnings to the household, spending only on himself. And now he wants a divorce because he has a mistress and a child. I tear up the divorce papers into tiny pieces, throwing them angrily into the trash can. My blood is boiling. Don't mess with me. How selfish can you get? I clenched my fists. If that's how it's going to be, I have plans of my own. You're going to pay for everything you've done. A week later, Richard returns with Cindy, but the baby is nowhere to be seen. He probably left her with someone, anticipating a showdown. When Kyle comes to meet them, Richard shows a slight discomfort. Nice to meet you, Kyle. I'll be your new mom soon. Ignoring Cindy's overly enthusiastic greeting, Kyle turns his gaze to Richard. Dad, you're back, so you should say I'm home. Richard ignores Kyle's remark with a sullen face, holds Cindy's hand, and leads her to the table, sitting her beside him. As I make tea, Richard calls out roughly. I don't need tea. Just hand over the divorce papers. Well, we're in for a long haul. You'll want something to drink. I say, pouring tea for the four of us and placing it on the table. Kyle sits across from Richard, and Cindy sits opposite me, as we all take our seats. I pondered how much to tell Kyle, but he's in his 3rd year of middle school, so I figured he could handle it and told him everything. After moistening my throat with tea, I simply tell Richard. I threw away the divorce papers. What? Hey, you can't be serious about not wanting to divorce me that much. Richard's smirk was met with Kyle's look of utter disdain. You can't divorce Mom, you know? Because the total cost for 2 new cars, $80,000, I still haven't gotten it back from you. Richard's face turned pale. I won't let you forget. When are you planning to repay me? I fronted the entire amount. That's right, Dad. Besides, how are we supposed to live if you remarry this person? Kyle chuckled. We've been living off Mom's earnings, so maybe it's best to postpone the divorce until you can support yourself, don't you think? Richard panicked visibly. Cindy looked on with wide eyes, turning to Richard's profile. Huh? What are you talking about? Richard, what's this all about? No, it's just family matters, you doesn't need to know. Richard stumbled over his words as I thrust the printed payment history at him. Look, this is for the old car, 84 payments. And this is for the new car. Do you understand, Cindy? It's all paid from my card. Cindy checked the details, tilting her head in confusion. Why doesn't Richard pay for it himself? He's supposed to earn $100,000 a year, a department head at S Corporation. Kyle and I burst out laughing at the same time. Come on, still carrying around a business card from 15 years ago? That's a scam. Your current title is unemployed, right? We were laughing so hard, we were rolling. No. I'm a freelance writer. Self-proclaimed, a travel website writer, right? Earning less than a high schooler's part-time job. Used to be $80,000 a year, now what, for $1,000? Cindy's eyes widened. What? $4,000? That's right. Look. Oh, stupid. I opened the bank book to show Cindy. She was speechless when she saw the same company name for the deposits of $4,000 or $5,000 at the end of every month. So, all these designer clothes you're wearing, those shiny leather shoes, and the luxury sports car, did your wife buy all that? And all the treats you've given me, all paid for by your wife. That's right. Look at this. I leaned over the desk, showing the credit card statement to Cindy. This man, taking advantage since I hardly use it, went and used it without asking. I'll pay it back later, it's fine, isn't it? We're family after all. Richard shouted. In 2 or 3 years, I should be earning over $100,000 again. Cindy, you believe in me, unlike these people, right? Cindy gave a vague smile. You were saying the same thing when Kyle was a baby. 15 years later, nothing has changed. Next to me, Kyle nodded. Cindy, you can do whatever you want, live together or remarry. As long as you settle the new car payment and the unauthorized card use that I covered. Of course, that's separate from the alimony and the child support you owe us, Dad. Shut up, I know. Richard shouted back, then turned to Cindy with clasped hands. So, Cindy, you'll lend me the money to pay back Maria, right? Well, can you give me a moment to think? Richard. Cindy's cheeks twitched. The most reasonable reaction, I thought. What? I'll pay you back later, right? We're going to be married, it should be okay. Richard was pushing his flawed logic on Cindy, who was visibly hesitant. With a look of incredulous amusement, I grabbed my phone. Well, time for phase 2 of my revenge. By the way, did Cindy accompany you to the resort you visited? I asked cheerfully. Cindy awkwardly looked away, but Richard, completely unabashed, smirked. Ah, yes. The scenery was beautiful, it was a great place. That's nice to hear. You got that right. I smiled warmly and directed my grin at Cindy. See, my cousin runs the resort. Since you two came together, she sent me pictures as proof of your affair. I opened the app on my phone, tapped on the photo file, and placed my phone in the center of the dining table so everyone could see. Oh? Who's that with Cindy? Huh? Cindy froze as she peered into the image. Richard, adopting the same posture next to her, quickly turned into a picture of fury. Cindy, who is this? Hey! Taking pictures without permission is a violation of privacy. Cindy was indignant, but I just smiled gently. I'm sorry. Just couldn't forgive my cousin's husband's infidelity, ended up taking quite a few shots. Meddling too much. Richard, honey, it was just an acquaintance I ran into by chance. Don't worry about it. Cindy squirmed and leaned on Richard's arm, but he shook her off. I made the reservation because Cindy wanted to go. Then, Richard's face stiffened in realization. Now that you mention it, you were gone when I woke up in the middle of the night. Were you in this guy's room? No, it's not like that. He's really just an acquaintance. Cindy kept making excuses, but I almost laughed. I took a large envelope prepared at the end of the table, took out several photos, and spread them on the table. Cindy seemed shocked too, covering her mouth and screaming. The pictures were sent to me last year. Cindy, pregnant, was snuggled up to a man as they left an OB/GYN clinic. Hey! I just asked to accompany me. Trust me, Richard. Cindy clasped her hands together, desperately making excuses as Richard let out a menacing voice. I began reading from the investigation report I pulled from the envelope. Well, it was a prenatal class that day. If anyone should accompany you, it should be the father, right? Oh? Isn't that the baby from the other time? Not Richard's child? Cindy fell silent, and I let out a sly smile. This guy, father of your child, cheating with another woman and then bailing after the birth? That's cold. Poor Cindy. As I sneered, Richard stammered while defending Cindy. Cindy wouldn't do such a thing, right? The father of the child being some other guy, that can't be. I'm sorry. Cindy apologized in a weak voice, and Richard, momentarily frozen, flushed with anger and shame. Left by that guy, so you lied about the baby being mine to push for marriage? Ridiculous. Richard bellowed, and Cindy yelled back defiantly. What are you saying? You were the one drowning in debt, supported by your wife, lying through your teeth to me. You have no right to complain. Then Cindy turned her anger towards me. You're awful, too. Knowing about the affair all along, letting your husband stray? That's right. I've been dealing with my wayward husband for 15 years. I thought I'd present irrefutable evidence and milk him for all the alimony I could get. I let out a sardonic smile. My phone kept blowing up with lovey-dovey messages by mistake, suddenly dressing fancy, coming home reeking of women's perfume, it was all too clear. And with that, Kyle crossed his arms and nodded. Always in a good mood when at home. Seriously, after everything Mom has done for you, how can you even think of cheating? What kind of nerve? Kyle, with a look of utter disbelief on his face. I wanted to check her address, so I hired a detective agency. Turns out, they gave me a bunch of extra photos, so I thought I'd share them with you, Richard. I announced, dripping with sarcasm, to Cindy and Richard, who were glaring at each other. Yeah, I remember you saying how you're not the type to be bossed around by your superiors. Blabbing about that, weren't you? Pretty bold words from someone who got fired for a scandal. Richard's eyes widened in shock. How did you know that? I heard it from the person who introduced you to me. She said with a sneer, revealing the truth. You invited the new employees out for drinks, and when you were coming back in a taxi, you touched them. They complained to their boss, and you got fired. Served you right. Richard trembled with rage. They're making a big deal out of nothing. I only touched them over their clothes. It was just the alcohol speaking. It's not a big deal. The lowest of the low, Dad. Kyle criticized coldly. When I heard about this, I felt so embarrassed. More shocked than I was when I realized I wasn't favored. Thinking what a shameful man. Really, what do you think women are? So, Richard, you were that kind of man. Disgusting. Cindy looked at Richard as if he were something vile. What? I'm not taking lectures from someone who tries to saddle me with a kid that's not mine. Richard retorted with a fierce look. Your actions are no better. It's the same either way. The new employees you harassed are planning to sue you, so be prepared. Richard looked surprised. What? For something like that? They're not satisfied with just firing you. They want damages for the emotional pain. Richard was incredulous. I don't have that kind of money. He yelled, his face turning red, while Kyle looked on, exasperated. Dad, you should really take responsibility for your own actions. Such a tough spot, Richard. No amount of money seems to be enough, huh? I said, offering a pitiful smile to Richard, then turned my gaze to Cindy. Well, Cindy, if you want, I can hand him over, though he's not much. I don't want him. Such an old man. Cindy stood up forcefully. I thought of making him a father since he said he was a manager at a big corporation with an income of $100,000 a year. She glared at Richard with scorn, speaking rapidly. But in reality, he's just a prideful liar living off his wife, bad with women and drowning in debt. I regret ever dating him. Give me back my time. That's my line. Richard stood up and yelled back. I'd never want a woman who plays two timing games. Don't you dare show your face to me again. Then let's break up. Goodbye. With her shoulders tensed, Cindy stormed out of the house, leaving Richard to collapse on his knees at the doorway, sobbing and muttering resentments. Cindy, you're terrible. You said you loved me, yet you were fooling around with a younger man. I don't need a child from another man, even if it's a girl. I sternly reprimanded the slumped Richard. Abandoning your role as Kyle's father to desire a child with your mistress led you to this. Children aren't accessories, you know? Think about Kyle's feelings for once. It's okay, Mom. I don't consider him my father anymore. Kyle said, smiling sadly. I've seen him just as a roommate for a long time. As I glanced at my sniffling, pitiful husband slumped on the floor, I sighed. I'm completely fed up, Richard. From now on, let's communicate through a lawyer. I informed Richard with a solemn tone. I'll file for divorce once the payment for the 2 cars I covered, the unauthorized card usage, and the alimony have all been transferred to my account. There's no way I can pay all that at once. Since we haven't filed for divorce yet, we could just cancel it. Richard, almost as if claiming victory from defeat, lit up his tear and mucus-stained face. Then we can save on the alimony and child support. Come on, Maria, I was wrong. Let's start over. I instinctively shoved Richard away as he reached out to me. Don't joke with me. Later, Kyle and I kicked the persistently clinging Richard out of the house. After the divorce, Richard, who was thrown out of our house, went crying to his mother, who was furious about his infidelity due to concern for her public image. Having been disowned by his mother, he moved into a cheap apartment and started working seriously for the first time in 15 years. Facing the barrier of being 50, he couldn't land a full-time sales position, eventually finding hard manual labor. He's been working desperately every day, being yelled at by supervisors younger than himself. Later, Richard, sued by new employees, paid a settlement to avoid court. He financed this by selling his current luxury sports car. However, it was nowhere near enough to cover the unauthorized credit card charges, alimony, and the payment for the cars I covered, resulting in him piling up more debt to settle his dues. No doubt, he's constantly chased by repayments to me, with only a little money remaining in his hands. Of course, I also demanded alimony from Cindy. It seems her parents covered it and transferred it to my account. The baby's father was a client at the club. Cindy, who got pregnant by a client, was fired for breaking the rules and went back to live with her parents. However, she was disowned by her own parents after giving birth. Now, she's enduring harsh days, working at a different club from before on weekdays and at a restaurant on weekends, while her baby stays at a daycare. Kyle's child support is being properly deposited into my account every month. We've contracted through a lawyer that if it's ever late, I will sue immediately. Now in his first year of high school, Kyle is working hard in an advanced class with the goal of becoming a pharmacist. Wait for me, Mom. I'll make things easier for you once I graduate from college. Kyle, who manages to earn his own spending money despite his busy study schedule, said with a smile. Compared to the days filled with worries over Richard's debt, working to save for college feels almost enjoyable. From now on, I want to spend fulfilling days together with my kind and reliable son.